I wanted to create this video in order to get everybody started with Fusion 360 in creating their models. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to work with the sculpting only function of Fusion 360. So to get into that function, if you go up to Create and click on the rounded box, the purple one, that will bring you into the sculpt environment. And that'll switch all of your tools basically over to those that you need for the sculpt environment. So to begin with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple primitives, right? So if I go to Create and let's make a torus. Okay, what it's going to do is before I set that torus, what Fusion 360 wants me to do is to basically set the axis on which I want to work. So you'll see that when I move my mouse around, it's actually moving those coordinates around. When I get to the view that essentially lays the axes down flat on the screen, I'm going to click, and then it'll allow me to select a center point, and I can either type it in, or click. I'm going to click, and then I'm going to set the thickness of it. I'll just hit enter and go with their default, right? So to move around, if I hold down my scroll button, that gives me the pan, and if I hold down Shift and scroll button, that gives me the orbit. And those are going to be your two main ways of zooming in and out, as opposed to using, well, in addition to using your scroll button too as well. And this is, if you've worked with 3D CAD, it's pretty much the same thing. So they're taking that technology that they've developed in 3D CAD and they've brought it over into Fusion 360. So here I have a torus. And what I want to do is I can start to amend and edit the form. So to begin with, if I hold down if I do a right click, right, I can go to edit form, okay, and that'll allow me to edit the form pretty quickly and easily. So if you go to the menu, you can see that there is a T-spline entity that's selected. And I can deselect it if I want. Okay, and then it'll tell me to select it. So it's basically telling you the steps that it wants you to take along the way. It goes to, the next option is transform mode. So there's the multi transform mode, there's the translation, there's the rotation, and there's the scale. And we'll look at a few of those in a second. There's a coordinate space, so there's a world space, a view space, and a local. You can basically change the views with that. And then the selection filter, and this is important because you can either select a vertex, you can select an edge, a face, all of it, or the body. Okay, so that's basically going to make more detailed the area that you're going to select, or the object that you're going to select in order to make changes. So if I click on vertex, it's going to highlight the vertices. And you'll see if I click on one of them, this, I don't know what they refer to it here, but essentially it's all of the transformations that you can make in, to this vertex. So if I click on the up arrow and drag, it'll allow me to move it that way. Again, the other arrows will allow me to move it in different directions. Okay, and I can also, gets a little finicky, select the rotation so I can rotate it. Okay, and also you'll see that there is an input here, so I can also type in, like -30, and it'll accept that, and then it'll get out of the command. Okay, so you can see that I can start to modify it. Okay, and again, go to edit form. If I select an edge, I can do the same thing with an edge. If I select a face, I can do the same with a face. So on and so forth. And I can also do multiple faces, multiple vertices, multiple edges in order to affect it this way. Okay, so this is using the rotate, and what you'll find is that when I do that, even though, you know, this model is pretty malleable, these areas in here where you see these intersections, that's where printing is going to have an issue. So we'll see that moving forward. We can run an analysis and it'll tell us where the issues are. Okay, so essentially that's, you know, really the basis of, you know, using the edit form. If I use another form, so let's say, oops, let's move this over. Let's go to pipe. Actually, let's do a cylinder. You can use a pipe with a path. So if I sketch, let's say a spline, and hit enter and hit OK, I can create a pipe using that path. Okay, and you have a box display and a curve display, and you have a curve tolerance that you can work with. You can work with the end types, so open, I can square it off, I can spike it, and I can adjust the amount of segments. Okay, and you'll see that the more I put in there, the more segments it's going to have, and the fewer is going to make it straighter. Okay, so that's the trick behind the pipes, is you actually have to create a path first. So I'll hit OK, and then what I want to do is I want to go to the cylinder, and I want to create, again, set the scene, the axis, set the radius, and I can stretch it. Okay, and hit enter, and I can take this whole thing. Oops. Select. My mouse doesn't work well. There we go. And you can hold down Control to deselect. So you deselect these pieces. And I can move this guy over. Okay, and then I can also do Control C and a Control V. Or if that doesn't work, I don't know why it's not working on this, I can go to copy and paste. And I can paste another one. Okay, and you'll see that when I do that, it actually moves the coordinates. It extends that field. Now, what I can do is you'll find that you know, a lot of the ends aren't actually capped, right? So the way to do that is if I go to modify, and this is where you can start to play with the modifies a little bit more. Okay, if I go to fill hole and I select that hole, you'll see that what happens is it now fill hole mode, it fills it with a reduce star, a fill star, or a collapse. And if I select reduce star and I click on maintain crease edges, that'll give it a flat cap. So again, I'm going to hit OK. I right click, repeat fill hole, select these objects, OK. Select the edges, right click, repeat fill hole, and then hit OK. And those are all filled. Now to use my modifiers, if I go to the modify menu, you'll see that there's many different types, right? You can subdivide, well, first of all, you know, you can edit form, which is what we already did. We can insert edges, so if we need to insert an edge on a face, we can click and it'll move one over. We can either type it in or we can click or hit enter to add it. So I just added that edge if I want to subdivide that face more. There's insert point, so we can do the same thing and insert the point. We can merge the edge, which essentially we would merge. Let's see if I delete that face and that face. If I merge, not you, group 1, group 2, okay, you can see it'll merge your edges. Okay, which is a lot like bridge. I actually prefer the bridge because it'll allow me to bridge faces together, right? So I prefer it for this exercise. So if I go to modify and bridge, I can select faces, hit OK. It'll give us the arrows, which will point to basically what the alignment or the normals are for those faces. And you can see that now it created a bridge like that. And then I can also, delete out faces. And then I can bridge side 1, side 2, and hit OK, and it'll bridge those together, right? So what I'm doing is I'm maintaining that there's no holes in my model. So to go through some other options, you have weld vertices, which essentially takes a vertex and it welds it to another vertex. Now what you'll notice is that when I do this, and this is a good thing to note, is that everything turns rectangular and isn't as rounded as it was before. And that's essentially telling you the model that they're telling you that the model really can't do what it's doing, right? So that's kind of the warning. It's saying this isn't really something that I can do, so I'm going to give you a graphic output that looks odd and should make you scratch your head. So I think it does the job very well, and that it is, does make me scratch my head. And that's because when I go to print this, it's not going to print correctly. So that's the feedback of the program telling you that it can't really do that. So I'm going to hit Control Z and undo that. And if you look at some of the other options, you have some other options. We're not really going to go through those because I want this to be a pretty quick tutorial. But you can start to explore some of these options. The one thing to note also is the thicken, and that's if I essentially have, let's create, we could actually create a box. Create a box on this plane. Okay, I'm going to hit OK to set it. And if I start to delete these faces, what you'll see is that it's basically an empty shell, right? And so what I can do is I can use the thicken in order to select that box, hit enter, and I can give it essentially a thickness and a shell. And that's going to be imperative when you go to print these forms, that might not have a thickness to them. They do need a thickness when they print. So that's the way of giving them a thickness. Now, what we talked about before with T-splines is that we can add symmetry, and you'll see that those are the next options. So I can go into Mirror Internal, and it'll essentially, with that green line, it'll create that symmetry. I can hit OK. I can repeat that symmetry by clicking two faces that are adjacent to each other. And any time that it comes up with that green line means that it's actually going to register that symmetry. So from before, if I go into edit form and I start to adjust some of these, okay, you'll see that it maintains that symmetry. And again, this is just edit form, so I can select vertices to play with. You know, if I want to insert vertices, I can do it that way. But all I'm doing is I'm just playing around with it, adding this symmetry to it. Now, in erasing everything else on the screen, what we want to do next is when we go to print our models, we need to make sure that they have continuity and that you don't have faces that are intersecting each other, because what printing doesn't like, it doesn't like self-intersecting faces. So the one thing that you can do is you can actually run it through an analysis, and if you go to inspect and a zebra analysis, that's one of the ways that we do it, where if I select the body, you'll see that it essentially applies this zebra striping to it, and it's one way of seeing the continuity of that zebra striping, right? So if I let's take this edit form, and if I select, let's go to faces, right, and rotate it. It might still work like that, so let's rotate it a little bit more. Okay, we hit OK. And then if we go to our zebra analysis again, and I select my body, you'll see that that continuity, it might not like that. It definitely won't like this. And that's where you see that continuity that's broken, right? Because we have faces that are self-intersecting each other. So this model might just give me some problems, okay? But that's good because that's a learning possibility. So if I go to OK, right, and center this and go to finish form, okay, it's telling me that it might be self-intersecting, okay? And what happens is that it gives us this warning, and it failed to convert. And you'll see that anything in red, right, is where it's going to have an issue. So if I go to return and to close, what I want to do now is I want to change my model. Okay, so I want to edit it. And I want to try to rotate back these faces. If I can, you know, sometimes maybe the easiest thing to do would just be to go back and undo that rotation, right? This one looks to be okay, so we can run this. And it worked, because now what it did is it brought us back to the model workspace, and you'll see that there were no issues. Okay, so then we can see that this model is actually going to work. Now, to get this model printed, what we want to do is we want to save it as an STL file. So if I go up to the name of the model, and if I right-click, you can go to Save as STL, and it'll select. Binary is fine. Refinement, you can play around with that if you want high, low, or custom. And then you can hit OK. And it'll save it as an STL file. And an STL file is a stereolithography file. And essentially what it is it's one of the most easy, ubiquitous, you know, type of model that you can save that pretty much works anywhere, right? It's a pretty utilitarian model. So it essentially works with any type of printer. So you'll find that a lot of times when you go to get things printed, they'll ask for an STL file, and that's because that's probably one of the most common formats for 3D printing. So in order to create this model, what we want to do is we want to get it fabricated, and we have to think about how we want it to be fabricated. So with the 3D printer, what you could do is you could actually connect a 3D printer, and there's other resources up here too as well, right to Fusion 360. My 3D printer has its own proprietary software. So basically what we could do is we could send it to, just save it as an STL and then plug it into that software. And what it's going to do is it's going to generate the slices to make the form itself. But what we can also do is there's another app that you can download from Autodesk, which is 123D Make. And what this does is it allows you multiple options for fabricating your models. So if I go to import and find my STL file that I created, okay, you can see here it is, right? You can see this interface is very, very similar, and that's because Autodesk likes to keep it consistent. And so you'll see it over here to the left. There's Model STL. You can see the manufacturing settings, so you can play around with this a little bit. You can see the paper size. You can see the units, in inches, the height of it, the width, the length, etc., etc. You could always change that. And then if you go to construction technique, you can actually go through the type of construction techniques available. So if you go, for example, to stacked slices, you could create essentially a laser cut file, which is what these are off to the side, and you can stack these slices. So you can see if I click on that, right, I'm able to see the slices that are generated from that, and these are solid slices, right? And if I go into model issues, it'll tell you that if there are any issues, it would list them right there. Okay. Other options, right, are, and that also comes with if you want dowels or not. Okay, so it'll place these dowels, and it actually will show you that assembly, and it'll add it to this as well. They get a little crazy over here. Okay, so that's one option. You could go into interlocked slices. So again, what it's doing is it's creating these sheets that you could essentially print out and reassemble this model. Okay, so those are interlock slices. You can change the count. You can change the slice direction. Yes, if I do this, it should rotate. You can modify the form. You can go into assembly steps. So it'll tell you the assembly steps. And then you can get the plans themselves. Okay. And in this case, you have these sheets, right, that you can essentially, what you can do is you can bring them to a laser cutter, because what it does is if you look down here, it actually has you save it as an EPS, a PDF, and a DXF. And you can export those or print them. And DXF works with AutoCAD. PDF, you can send it to Illustrator. EPS, you can also send it to Illustrator. And what's great about those is you can automatically generate the files for your laser cutter. So those are interlock slices. You can create curves. Okay. Here you can see the slice direction. So this is a preview of it. Radial slices. Folded panels. Okay, and again you can see these patterns over here to get cut. and 3D slices. Okay, so again, what you could do is you could process it in here. This is probably the best way of processing it for creating it from a laser cut. Or what you can do is you can also use this to create the slices for the 3D printer. But as I said, a lot of them have their own proprietary software, so that's the way to go with that. And then you can just run it through the manufacturing process. So whether you're getting it laser cut or you're creating these slices, and then that essentially manufactures your model. Okay, and again, this is 123D Make.